Everyone makes mistakes when they buy their first Tesla. The problem is, some of those mistakes can cost you thousands of dollars. And one of them, almost every Tesla expert recommends.
After owning 5 Teslas, I've seen the same mistakes happen over and over again. We're going through the 7 costly mistakes every Tesla owner should avoid, and one bonus one that could save you a ton of money.
Let's start with the one that feels completely harmless. If you've ever closed a Tesla door by grabbing the glass or opened it using the manual release, you're definitely not alone.
Tesla doors are unique, but they're not also. A lot of different OEMs and manufacturers that use frameless doors, right?
Yeah,
so
BMW, Mercedes.
Subaru, there's a bunch of companies, any convertible of basically all time. They're not unique in this regard that the doors are frameless. Where they are unique, and what Tesla really kicked off, was the electronic door actuating system. Now, in the past, these were mechanical. There was a metal cable that's threaded through all these little things in the door. You pull a lever, and that opens the door manually. It's just always the same experience, unless that cable breaks, and then it's a really crappy experience, which that can happen on older cars. But with Tesla, things are a little bit different. Now, by law, they have to have a mechanical release. The physical latch on the door, on the front doors, which is actually near the buttons. It's good placement if you're in an emergency, bad placement if you have older relatives that are thinking like, oh, they're gonna open the door that way. And also, a lot of luxury cars, like Mercedes and stuff, they open with kind of a similar thing to the manual Tesla. So there are a lot of people that get in the habit of manually opening, closing the door quite frequently because they're just not used to it. Manufacturers that have manual or mechanical opening doors that are frameless, they'll account for, okay, this is how this is supposed to function. So something like an Audi TT, it's programmed even into older vehicles where the window will drop when someone opens it, and then the window will go back up after it's been closed. It's recommended not to do this over and over again. We've seen repair bills from $1,000 to $2,000 just because of damage to the door frame, to the window regulator, all kinds of stuff we've seen posts on drama of people having. Now, I don't know if there was other things at play there. Tesla recommends not to do this. It's a really easy thing to get in the habit of doing the correct way, just using the electronic button. But it is a weird motion because it's like you have to press the button and sweep the door open at the same time. And so I know for some people it takes a little getting used to.
Yeah, you could also damage the rubber gaskets that go around the door that keep the water out. Doing this 1 or 2 times is a mistake, especially when you first buy your Tesla and you're not used to the button. That's going to be fine, but doing it over and over and over again, that's when it can add up and become a super expensive repair bill. The next mistake, though, is something that Tesla owners leave running every single day without realizing how much it's actually costing them.
That brings us to Sentry Mode. Sentry Mode is one of Tesla's best features, and arguably it saved people thousands of dollars.
But that doesn't mean it should be running 24/7 everywhere you go.
We touched on this in another video, but Teslas have vampire drain or battery drain. They're going to keep the battery at an optimal temperature. They run the software, the computers. Sentry Mode adds another layer on top of all of these little things that are running in the background. Now, it's not bad. Normally, a Tesla might lose 1 or 2% a day if it's left at the airport for a week or something. But once you add Sentry Mode on top of this, now, when it first came out in 2020, it was really bad. You could lose like 10% a day. Now, they've optimized it a lot over the last half a decade, and it really sips electricity. But it's something that if you have it on at home in your garage, not only is it going to be annoying, giving you alerts, recording stuff to your onboard dashboard that it has, it's also going to eat through a considerable amount of electricity over the course of a month. So definitely use it when you have the grocery store, you're going to the grocery store, you're going to your work or whatever, especially if you have shady coworkers that like to steal your lunch and stuff. But if you're going to church or you're going to your grandmother's house or you're going to wherever, you can exclude locations in the navigation screen where it'll automatically not turn Sentry Mode on if you're at those favorited spots.
Now, using up a little bit more electricity month over month, that's going to cost you, but it's not going to cost you that much. The real problem here is the damage to the battery. If you're using it 24/7, your battery is constantly cycling. It's going down and then you're going to recharge it, going down, recharge it. And that can just put unnecessary wear on your battery, degrade it quicker, which means you're moving way faster towards a massive battery repair bill.
Now, it sounds extreme. It sounds like some extreme to talk about running a couple watts to do Sentry Mode. But at the end of the day, it's like if you don't need it, it's the same as tires. All of these little things add up to big differences. And the battery pack is the most expensive thing in EVs right now. So it's just an easy way to save the components of the vehicle, save a little bit of taxing on your battery pack, and put a couple miles back in your pocket. So at least that's only costing you maybe a couple dollars a year of a little bit of extra electricity. But this next one, it used to be one you could fly under the radar with and not have to worry about. But now, with testing and diagnostics and all of these tools like Recurrent and Voltest, this one can actually affect your pocketbook in a serious way.
Battery degradation is one of the biggest concerns that new owners have. And ironically, they're making it worse without even realizing it.
Now, this is kind of serious because how do you tell the condition of a battery? Now, a couple years ago, we had technology like Recurrent. Recurrent allows you to scan a battery, and it just takes an estimate of an estimate of an estimate, puts it online, pings that person's car every couple hours and sees what does the BMS of that car think that the batteries have. BMS is Battery Management System, for those of you that are new. And it's an estimate of an estimate. It's not super accurate, but even that is a good directional indicator of the health of a battery. It's kind of like BMI for body mass index. It's not very accurate. If you're really jacked and big, it might say that you're obese, even though you're just really bulky and you go to the gym a lot. Now, technology has come a long way in that time, and now dealerships are using technology like Voltest, which is more like an OBD2 reader that you would get to scan your car at, I don't know, AutoZone or something to read a code. Well, now they can plug something similar in, read your battery's state of health or SOH, and see how much has it degraded, how many kilowatt hours of battery have you lost, how much range do you have left, and how does that compare to when it was new. There are used car dealerships now that are scanning this on the market, and so they know when they're taking in a car, it could be the same year, same mileage, and they're gonna give a different offer for this one than they are for this one because this one has a battery that's shot. If you're just leasing a car, you don't have to think about this, but as someone that's gonna be living with it for a while, especially if you're buying a used EV, this is a big deal. You no longer wanna just charge it to 100% and ragtag beat it up because you will end up paying for it in the long run, especially in the coming months.
Now, I don't want to leave you guys empty-handed. Some things that you guys could avoid is leaving your car at 100%, leaving your car at 0%, leaving your car sit in the sun for days on end. We're gonna have another video coming out on this in the next coming weeks, so definitely take a look at that when that drops. Now, even if you guys are doing everything right with your battery, there's another charging habit that can cost you significantly more money than it actually needs to.
Tesla's supercharger network is incredible. And I remember supercharging the first time in my first Tesla. It was like such a magical experience. It wasn't like going to the grimy gas pump and touching all those disgusting buttons on the card reader. It was so magical just plugging the car in and it was like billing itself and charging itself. I didn't have to do anything or touch anything. It was so cool. And the weird whirring, whizzing sounds that it makes when it's supercharging and preconditioning the battery, I just thought the whole experience was so cool. But the mistake here is supercharging and going to Tesla superchargers as if they're your personal garage space.
We actually have a tool on our website that breaks down the cost between gas, public DC fast charging, and home charging, just so you guys can see how much more it's gonna cost you per month and per year, and even over 5 years, exclusively supercharging. It can cost you up to $8,000 more over 5 years if you only supercharge. Now, not only will this slowly degrade your battery, and again, we'll get into that in another video, but it's just gonna cost you a lot of money paying for that electricity, and it's gonna cost you a lot of time going to the supercharger, waiting there, and then coming back home. So what I recommend is that you have a home charging setup before you guys buy your EV, whether that be a Tesla setup, just a regular level 1 cable or level 2, it doesn't really matter. Some statistics is that the average American's commute per day is under 40 miles per day, and even if you're charging on a level 1 cable, you'll get about 40 miles per day. So that works out perfectly for most Americans.
Now, not everybody has the option of charging at home. For people that charge at apartments, this isn't the only way to do it to have home charging. I know people that don't have access at home and they might have access at school or at work, and so they still have an EV, and in fact, sometimes their fueling, their charging at school or at work can be free. So actually, which is ironic because the parking garage that we're in right now is free. If you guys want us to make a video for apartment dwellers that need some hacks on how to figure out charging, we can do that. Let us know in the comments if that's a video you'd like us to make.
Speaking of expensive habits though, the next mistake literally wears money right off your Tesla.
Are you talking about wives and shopping?
No.
I can't speak for you guys, but I will speak for myself and my friend group. Tesla acceleration is addictive. It's one of the most costly problems because every time I get to a light and there's somebody that thinks they want to race me, every now and then I just want to teach somebody a lesson and fly off the line. To the speed limit, of course, but from 0 to the speed limit very quickly.
Because it's so addictive, that's why it's actually so common. The problem with this mistake is that it wears out your tires super quickly and it kills your efficiency.
Not only is this a less efficient way to drive, which makes a big deal, like an EV, if you drive it at full tilt, you're not going to get your 300 miles in range. You'll probably get more like 50 miles in range. If you were to really drive around a racetrack, EVs are super, super efficient, but that efficiency is volatile. The other reason that this is a problem, it's not just about saving a couple bucks on a fill-up, but tires for EVs tend to be expensive. They usually have a lot of different technologies, whether it's like eco technologies to really increase your range as much as possible, or sound deadening because EVs are already so quiet. A lot of them will have foam insulation, sound deadening technology. Some of them even have the run flat technology. And so EV tires for something like this, the Model Y, you're looking at $1,200 to $1,600 for a decent name brand set of tires. Now, we do have some videos on how you can save money on tires without skimping on the performance. You can easily cut that $1,200, $1,400 in half, but you're still going to wear through tires quite quickly, accelerating like your Michael Schumacher.
Yeah, so we're not saying don't have fun in your car, but what we are saying is just don't do it every time you pull up to a stop sign or a stoplight.
One thing to keep in mind when shopping for tires for an EV is EVs historically in the past had tended to be a little bit heavier. Now this is changing as gas cars get heavier from regulation and EVs get optimized. However, you still want to make sure you're buying the right tire. You don't necessarily need EV or eco technology tires, but you do want a tire typically that's XL load rated, and you typically will also have higher tire pressure than like an equivalent SUV of this size, or for the Model 3, an equivalent sedan of that size. So that's something you want to keep in mind, is just watching the load rating to make sure it can support the vehicle you have. One other thing to keep in mind for tires, I know we're throwing a lot at you of tire talk, so bear with us, but the other thing to keep in mind is this vehicle has, you guys can probably see from that angle, it has the aero wheels. And so the nice thing about the aero wheels is they have a thicker tire. Now going with the larger rims, like something like the Uber turbines, which are a 21-inch tire, so they're 2 inches more of rim, you get a thinner tire, so you get lower ride quality. Yes, you might get some better minor handling differences, but you lose the ride quality and you also lose a lot of the efficiency too, because these larger rims, they're heavier, they have more rotating mass, and the tires tend to be more expensive too. So you just want to be mindful, if you want a vehicle for road trips, for long range, and that's kind of your bias for the use case, you probably want to stay away from one that has aftermarket wheels or massive aftermarket wheels, or a Tesla Model 3 or Y Performance.
Yeah, not only that, but with a thinner tire, if you live in a state like PA where there's a pothole every 5 feet, you have a way greater risk of having a blowout hitting those potholes with a thin tire. But as expensive as tires are, there's one more thing that I see plenty of Tesla owners waste a lot of money on. A lot of Tesla owners actually recommend this.
This one is definitely going to upset some people. I can see our subscriber count going down already, ticking lower and lower and lower. But drum roll, please.
Yeah, we're talking about PPF, or paint protection film.
I am a Tesla fanboy, I guess, in some ways, but one of the things I'm not a Tesla fanboy about, and we'll just call it like we see it, is the paint. Tesla paint has never been amazing. It's always really thin and frail, actually thinner and more frail than my graying, aging hair. And so one of the things that a lot of people will do is when they buy a new Tesla, they have good intentions, they want to protect it, and so they get clear PPF or matte PPF, or maybe even vinyl wrap their whole car. But the problem with doing this is it's such a fallacy.
PPF can cost anywhere from $500 for like a single panel to up to $8,000 for the whole car. And you're getting into the price range of just repainting your whole entire car. And not only that, a lot of people, what I see the mistake of is they get PPF on their whole car and then they ended up only really needing it for the front of the car. So to respray just the bumper or the hood, it's going to be a lot cheaper than getting PPF in the first place. Not only that, but what a lot of people don't realize is PPF wears out over time, just like the paint.
Also, I hate to break it to all of us, but these cars, they're not ending up at Sotheby's or Barrett-Jackson. These are mass-produced cars, so treating it with PPF as if it were like a Lotus Exige S240 or some rare Ferrari is a little bit silly to me. You're better off keeping that money in your pocket as an insurance policy. Now, the reason a lot of YouTubers and experts will recommend this is because they're sponsored by various other manufacturers and they have like a referral link, and so if you get their PPF kit, they get a percentage of it. I get that, and that's all great. Like, people should earn a living and survive, and that's great. If PPF is for you, that's awesome. We're just saying don't get sucked into feeling like you absolutely have to have it and you're going to be terrified of road trips if you don't. You don't need to do that.
Something that's going to cost you a lot more than PPF is overspeccing your charging, which is our bonus.
Now, Tesla forums and Tesla groups have gotten better about this, but especially in the early days, people were so fast to recommend, yeah, get the 80 amp wall charger, like get the largest wall charger, run 60 amps to it. You need to have 11.5 kilowatts to max your car out. And meanwhile, the average American is doing like less than 40 miles to a commute and or doing some hybrid where they work from home. My recommendation to people, a lot of people, is getting started. Number one, before you go and buy your car, think about what charging you have available. Start thinking about how far away your electrical box is from where you would potentially charge your car. And a lot of people they might have a 30 amp outlet in the garage. They might have a dryer in the garage. Now, there's all kinds of cool tools that allow like smart splitting, where like you could plug in like something like the Tesla mobile connector, which Carson will show us here in a second. And you'd be able to charge both simultaneously, or charge your car and still have it use the dryer without unplugging and plugging all the time. It just won't run the EV charging portion when the dryer's running. So you just have to think about how your use case is going to be. I see a lot of people spend thousands of dollars over-speccing their charging, and they don't end up needing it in the long run. Now, it's really expensive, and it's like a one-time cost. If you move frequently, you're just updating your house for the next person. I really like the Tesla mobile connector. It's an awesome way to start out with just a regular outlet. You plug in at a regular outlet like you plug your vacuum into, and then if you want to get a 50 amp outlet later, even though it only does up to 32 amps, you can get a 50 or a 30. You don't have to go crazy, but it allows you to scale with it. It allows you to scale as you figure out, oh yeah, maybe I would want faster charging. You should test and see before you buy.
We're not saying cheap out on your charging at your home, because obviously charging uses electricity and that can become a fire risk if you're using a cheap outlet or a cheap cable, or you're not going up to the rated spec that it needs to be.
A Chinese EVSE from Amazon.
Yes, but what we are saying is don't spend a couple thousand to even tens of thousands of dollars upgrading your electrical panel just so you can have 50 amp charging when you don't even need it. That's why this bonus mistake might save you way more money than any other mistake on this list.
Which of the mistakes on our list stood out to most to you or surprised you guys the most? Let us know in the comments so we can keep trying to find outliers.
Yes, and I know we mentioned a couple things throughout this video, like our upcoming charging habits video. And if you want to know the moment that video drops, definitely subscribe to our newsletter in the description below, and hit the like and subscribe button on this video if you like this content and you want to see more of it.
Until next time, God bless.